Om Prithvi Shantirantariksha Shantir Dyau Shantir Disha Shantiravantara Disha Shantiragni Shantir Vayu Shantiraditya Shantif Chandrama Shantir Nakshatrani Shantirapa Shantiroshadaya Shantir Vanaspataya Shantir Gau Shantiraja Shantirashva Shantif Purusha Shantir Brahma Shantir Brahmana Shantif Shantireva Shanti Shantir Me Astu Shantihi. May there be peace on earth and in the sky. May there be peace in the water and in all directions. May there be peace in the plants, in the trees, and in animals. May there be peace in the hearts of all beings. May there be peace in everyone and in everything. Sarvetra Sukhinas Santu, Sarve Santu Niramayaha, Sarve Bhadrani Pashyantu, Ma Kaschid Dukkha Bhag Bhavet, Sarvastaratu Durgani, Sarvo Bhadrani Pashyatu, Sarvas Sadbuddhimapnotu, Sarvas Sarvatra Nandatu. May all be happy and healthy. May all see what is good, and may no one experience misery. May all overcome their obstacles and acquire good tendencies. May people everywhere find joy and fulfillment. Let us now spend some time touching the center of peace and joy in our hearts. A good way to begin the practice is to withdraw the scattered energies of the mind and bring them to rest on one point. That point can be our own breathing. Let us therefore practice breathing with awareness. As we breathe in, let us visualize that our body and mind are being filled with love, strength, and compassion. And as we breathe out, let us release all the stress, anxiety, and exhaustion in the body and mind. Let us practice this way for a while. Let us now turn our attention to the region of our heart. Although God is present everywhere and in everyone, the divine presence can be felt most clearly in our hearts. We can meditate in any way we have been taught. To remain focused, we can take the help of a short mental prayer or a mantra or a divine name. Let us now spend some time dwelling on the presence of God in our hearts. Om Asatoma Satkamaya Tamasoma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritam Gamaya. May the Divine lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. Peace, peace, peace be unto all. So we begin today on verse 36. Please repeat after me. Arjuna uvacha athakena prayuktoyam papam charati purushaha anichannapi varshneya Baladiva niyojitaha. Arjuna said, prompted by what does a man commit sin, even though unwilling, O Varshneya, being constrained as it were by force? Earlier in verse 34, I think, Krishna had pointed out that how we have our own specific likes and dislikes, and accordingly our senses react. Now what Arjuna is asking here is that even when we are aware that our likes and dislikes prevent us from seeing things clearly, even when we try to go beyond our own likes or dislikes, even then we are forced, as it were, to do what we do not always want to do. Or we are forced not to do what we should be doing. So what is that force which pushes us in spite of ourselves? The Krishna here is referred to as Varshneya. So the race to which he belonged was known as Vrishni. So according to the rules of Sanskrit grammar, one belonging to the Vrishni race becomes Varshneya. Kunti, one who is the son of Kunti, becomes Kaunteya, and so on. Even Pandavas, their father's name was Pandu. So the children of Pandu are called Pandavas. So that's how the Sanskrit grammar works. So this is the question. And as you might remember, I said that whatever Krishna wanted to teach, he has already given in the second chapter. So third chapter onwards are just a series of questions and doubts that Arjuna has. So that's how you can see this question answer format. So this is Arjuna's question. Let me read the question again. Prompted by what does a man commit sin, even though unwilling, O Varshneya, being constrained as it were by force? Now the word here is translated as sin. In Sanskrit it's called papam. We have a general idea of what sin means. But if we want to really be technical about it, then sin is probably not the best word. Theologically, in Judaic traditions, actually both, in Abrahamic traditions, actually you should say, because it's both among the Jewish, among the Christians, and among Muslims, the word sin has a specific meaning. The sin is an act of disobedience to God. So God wants us to act in a certain way, and we disobey God's will, then that is sin. That is how it is theologically understood in that tradition. In Vedanta, that's not exactly how it is. There isn't any mandate laid down by God. And so it's not really an act of disobedience against God. If anything, it's an act of disobedience against one's own better interests. So we are committing not a sin against God, but actually we are just sin against oneself. So the word sin is not really the best word if you want to be technical, but in a general sense, it conveys the idea. The idea is this: anything that will sooner or later lead to my suffering can be considered sin, because that's essentially what sin does, no matter in which tradition, in which way you understand it, whether it is thought in terms of going to some place called hell or wherever. Anything, any act which produces suffering for oneself is a sinful act. So that's the general sense in which we can understand the word papa. If you want to understand it in terms of karma theory, papa would really mean anything that stores up more painful karma for myself. That would be papa. So that is Arjuna's question. What is that force which forces me to do things which I don't want to do, or prevents me from doing things which I should do, even when I'm aware of my own likes and dislikes? And now Krishna answers in the next verse, 37. Shri Bhagavan Uvacha Kama Esha Krodha Esha Rajo Guna Samudbhavaha Mahashano Mahapapma Vidhenam Iha Vairinam. The Blessed Lord said, "This is desire, this is anger, born of the constituent of Prakriti called Rajas, of inordinate appetite and most sinful. Know it to be an enemy here." So Arjuna's question was, what is that force which pushes me in spite of myself? And Krishna's answer is simple. This is desire, kama. Desire is that force that pushes me. And it's not really a big rocket science. We know. What is it that makes us do things in life? What is it that impels our thought, our thinking process? Is clearly desire. Desire is the basic motivating power within us. So Krishna said, this is desire, this is anger, born of the constituent Rajas. So it might seem as if he's pointing to two things, kama and krodha, desire and anger. But what he's really saying is, the two are not really different. Desire and anger are not too different. They are really the one and the same force. Desire, when there is an obstacle in attaining a desire, then there is anger. Sometimes that anger is expressed outwardly if the obstacle is weaker than me. If the obstacle is stronger than me, I'm still angry, but I dare not show it outwardly. So you just kind of, you just keep your anger inside. But in both the cases, there is anger. So desire and anger really are not two different things. Born of Rajas. So we know about that there are three basic constituents, Sattva, Rajas and Tamas. And anger and desire both imply a great activity, both impel us to do things, and therefore they both are products of Rajas. Of inordinate appetite. Inordinate appetite, what clearly? It's like someone has a big appetite, means no matter how much you give that person will never say, oh, enough. The person is always hungry. In the same way, desire is like that. It's a bottomless pit, as they say. sometimes we might think, oh, let me suppose you, whether it's food or a computer game or anything that you enjoy very much. And it's always like, oh, just one more. I'll have one more. And then you think, oh, if I have one more now, then I don't need it. But then after that, you feel like having one more. So desire never ends. There is, some of you might be familiar with the story that comes in the Bhagavata. It's called of a king named Yayati. Very strong desire to enjoy life. So because he was a king, everything was available to him. All the joys were available to him, all the pleasures were available to him, and so he goes and has a good time. But of course, even a king has to get old sometimes. Not sometimes, all the time. Well, as all of us, there is no exemption from aging. And so when this king became old, the desire hasn't ended, but the body and the mind, through which really, these are the two containers through which we can enjoy. But the body and the mind have become old. They are no longer have the vitality, the energy that we have in youth. And so the king is so depressed that I want to enjoy life more, but now I can't do it. I'm too old, and one day I will die. And he became so depressed that he had a young son who just goes and says his father is extremely depressed. And he goes and asks, Father, what's the matter? And then the father said, well, this is the matter. The son could not bear, he loved his father so much, he could not bear to see his father so sad. And so he said, Father, I give you my youth. I will take your old age upon me. And see, medicine was much advanced in the early days, I think. They did it. So the father got the youth of the son, and the son then became old. And then once again, having got this young body and mind, and then this king again enjoyed for many years. But again, even still, that's still a body. So that body got old again. But his desire hasn't ended yet. Then a big realization came upon him. It's a very often quoted verse in Sanskrit. It goes like this: Na jatuv kama kamanam upabhogena shamyati havisha krishnavartmeva bhuya eva abhivardhate. Beautiful verse. What it means is this: Na jatuv kama kamanam upabhogena shamyati. Desire can never be fulfilled by satisfying, through satisfaction. The more you try to satisfy it, the more intense it gets. And the example, the second line gives the example, Havisha Krishnavatmeva. Just like there is a fire in front of you and say, I need to put out this fire, so let me put more ghee into it. The more ghee you put into it, the more butter you put into it, the fire is going to get even bigger. So just as fire cannot be put out by adding more butter into it, desire cannot end by fulfilling desire. That's the realization that came to Yayati, that king. And that is what is meant here by saying of inordinate appetite. And most sinful, again the word sin comes. What here sinful means is that it's so painful, it can bring us so much pain that you cannot get rid of it peacefully. Sometimes when we sing the glories of ahimsa, non-violence, we may not always think that violence has a role to play in life. We can't be merciful all the time. So when should we use violence? We should use violence to that which is of inordinate appetite and sinful. There is no mercy. You cannot say, oh, this desire is terrible and its anger is terrible, but I believe in non-violence. So I won't try to get rid of them because live and let live. That won't work. So these enemies of our spiritual life, you must kill them. So if we have any instinct to kill something, then use that instinct to kill these obstacles in spiritual life. No mercy. You see that it's a big story, so we won't go into that today. How in Narada's story, I had mentioned it on some earlier occasion, how when desire springs in the heart, you cannot forgive it. You have to destroy it. Because if you don't destroy it, then it might seem as if it is retreating, but again, at your most vulnerable state, it will catch you again. And that is why it has to be killed. And that is why Krishna says, know it to be an enemy here. So the real enemy, which forces us to do things or not do things in spite of ourselves, which does not care for our own will, is desire. Verse 38. Dhumena vriyate vannihi yatha darsho malena cha yathol vruto garbha tatha tene damavritam. As fire is enveloped by smoke, as a mirror is covered by dust, as a fetus is enveloped by the amnion, even so is this covered by it. Is this covered by it? Here, this means knowledge or the Atman, and covered by it means desire. So desire covers the reality, the truth, the knowledge. And the examples are given. Just as fire is enveloped by smoke, just as smoke covers fire, just as dust covers the mirror, and just as a newly born embryo is covered, exactly in the same way, desire and anger cover our knowledge, cover ourselves. And because we are covered, then we are not able to see it clearly. The three examples given here are sometimes explained as the kind of coverings that can come in the state of sattva, in the state of rajas, and in the state of tamas. So, desire covers knowledge as smoke covers fire in a state of sattva. In other words, if there is fire and there is so much smoke coming out, then of course you may not see the fire, but you will see just the smoke. But if there is a strong wind blowing, just a wind is enough to take the smoke away, and then you are able to see the fire. So just as a whiff or a wind of viveka, discrimination, discernment is enough then for us to then not get, even though in the mind of the people who are filled with sattva, desire may come, but it is so fragile as a smoke. So just a little bit of discernment, that smoke will go away and you will know what is the right thing to do. In the case of rajas, the example given here is a mirror covered with dust. Now that simply little bit of wind is not enough. Some amount of preparation and cleanliness, cleaning, some amount of greater effort is necessary. And that is in the state of rajas. Now in the state of tamas, the desire is the strongest. Because just as a newly born fetus, it needs a lot of effort and expertise to clean it. Exactly in the same way, in the state of tamas, it's a still greater covering of desire. So these three examples are given to point to three different states in which people normally are. Verse 39. Avritam jnaname tena Jnanino Nityavairina Kamarupena Kaunteya Dushpurena Nalena Cha. O son of Kunti, knowledge is covered by this eternal enemy of the wise in the form of desire, which is like an insatiable fire. So you see that Kauteya, the son of Kunti, that is how the grammar rule I mentioned earlier. So here Krishna refers to desire as the eternal enemy. If you look at the commentary on page 114, it's very beautifully given, so I shall read that. Knowledge is covered, etc. The discriminative knowledge is covered by desire. To the ignorant, of course, at the time of enjoyment, desire is the cause of pleasure, but the subsequent reaction is inimical. To the wise, on the other hand, who remembers harm in it, it is the cause of pain alone, even at that time. Therefore, it is said to be their eternal enemy. Moreover, though supplied with objects of enjoyment, yet insatiable, and because it leads to grief and affliction, it is like fire. By this, the eternal inimical nature towards all is declared. So why is it called an Nitya Vairi, an eternal enemy? It's not like it's only a temporary enemy. It's eternal enemy, which means it won't go away unless I kill it. That's the idea. Fortunately, it doesn't have rebirth. So if you kill it and make sure that you have really killed it, not just left it half dead. Because if it's half dead, it can come back to life again. You really have to kill it. That's why I said no non-violence when we are dealing with this. And it's eternal because it's cause of so much pain. Not just for a few days or a few years, it can be for life after life after life. In fact, the fact that we are in this bondage, this circle of birth and death, have been there for God knows for how long. It's because of this desire. That is why Krishna calls it the eternal enemy. This might seem to be very strong words. It seems like as if there is nothing good in desire at all. And the truth is that there is nothing good in it at all. It's difficult to understand it right away, or it's difficult to accept it right away, because at present, most of our joy seems to come as a fulfillment of desire. And therefore, this calling desire an eternal enemy might seem as if all the joy that I get through fulfillment of desire now, I have to let go of that joy. And what Krishna is pointing out here, and will become more and more clear as we continue with this study, is that what joy we seem to have now is only well, let me put it this way. I was about to say it's only an illusion of joy, but illusion is probably not a good word. Let's put it this way. Let's take one little extreme example. So when people get addicted to drugs, for instance, so when someone starts for the first time, and it can be a new experience, a thrilling experience, and something which you feel like, this is amazing. This is absolutely amazing. So, and then one said, well, if I've done it once and it was kind of fun, let me do it again. And I keep on doing it again, and I do it again, and I do it again. And then over time, then I get addicted to it. I get so addicted to it, then I cannot let go of it. Right? Then, in the long run, if no remedial measures are taken, everything is ruined. Life is ruined, health is ruined, everything is ruined. Mind is ruined, everything is gone. Now, to such a person, if this person is in the senses for a little while, or is trying to recover, trying to let go of that addiction, if you ask that person, but didn't you have a great time in the beginning? I mean, it's not great now, but in the beginning, wasn't it terrific? And at that point, this person would say, my life is so messed up now that joy I had in the beginning, I wish I didn't have that joy. Otherwise, I wouldn't, if it wasn't so joyful, if it wasn't so pleasurable, I wouldn't have gotten into it. So that joy, which was quite fun in the beginning, later on appears to be poisonous. And later on, towards the end of the Gita, Krishna will mention the different kinds of joys. That there are some joys, there are certain kinds of things which are in the beginning very pleasant, and the afterwards become very poisonous. And there are certain things which in the beginning are poisonous or not interesting, but afterwards become like nectar. For instance, say when you ask somebody, you must now, the exams are coming, you must study. Now, if you're not really that much into studies can be very boring. And at the worst can be very poisonous, really, because some interesting programs are going on television, or there is a ball game going on, or there is some fun thing going on, your friends are inviting you for a party, and you're told you must sit at home and study. But that's not enjoyable at all. But if now I do that thing which is not so enjoyable, not as much fun as going to a party, but if I do it, later on, I will be the one who have last laugh. Later on then, I do well in my exams, I become successful in life, I have a great career, and then I can go to as many parties as I want. But in the beginning itself, if I do it, then later on, it won't work. So this kind of example is sometimes given. Things sometimes in the beginning are not that interesting, later on become full of joy. Some things in the beginning are full of joy, later on become very painful. So that is why desire is considered as a great enemy. Verse 40. Indriyani mano buddhihi asyadhisthana muchyate etair vimohayatyesha jnanamavritya dehinam. The senses, the mind, and the intellect are said to be its seat. Covering knowledge by these, it dilutes the embodied being. So once, if somebody says, this is your enemy, or this is the source of all the pain and suffering that you are having and will have, and what will you do? You know that, well, one way is, as they say, fight or flight. One way is, well, let me run away as far away from this enemy as possible. But what if you cannot run away from that enemy? What if that enemy is there wherever you are? You cannot. Flight is not an option. If flight is not an option, then really you just have to fight. If you have to fight your enemy, then you must first know where the enemy is. You cannot simply go with you may be equipped with all arms and bullets and guns and swords or whatever you have, but you must first know where the enemy is. And so what Krishna is doing here is he's pointing out, yes, desire is the enemy. Where is this enemy located? And he says, the senses, the mind, and the intellect are said to be that enemy's seat. That is where the enemy is located. Now, why are these three things mentioned? Now, you might remember in the second chapter, I think verses 62 and 63, which gives the chain reaction of how desires come. And begins with this, dhyayato vishayan pumsaha sangasteshu pajayate sangat sanjayate kamaha kamat krodho bhijayate. If you have copies of the Gita with you, so why don't we just take a look at that? That'll be nice. So verse 2, 62nd, chapter 2, sorry. You see, for a person thinking of the sense objects, there grows an attachment for them. From attachment arises desire. From desire results anger. That's enough for the time being. So you see, it all begins with the sense objects. So once we are in touch with the sense objects, desires grow from there. Because once we see something, we are attached to it. And that attachment produces desire. And attachment, as I said, doesn't always mean you like it. Even if you dislike it, you are attached to it through your dislike. So attachment doesn't automatically mean I love it. I can be attached to something through hatred. Kamsa, they say, to show how attachment to God will free us. Sometimes they say, Kamsa, his uncle, who just tried so many times to kill Krishna. He just hated Krishna. But he was attached to Krishna through hatred. And because that produced that link with Krishna through hatred, after Kamsa died, he went to heaven. Now that doesn't mean that we should try that form of practice, but it just shows that being connected with God, even through hatred, can be uplifting. So I mentioned this only to show attachment does not simply mean liking something. Even disliking something is a form of attachment. So it's attachment to objects that produces desire. Desire either to want it or desire to run away from it. Both are desires. And it is the senses that we grasp through these three things. Clearly, the objects. Senses clearly grasp the objects through objects of perception are grasped through the sense of sight. Objects of sound. When the sound is the object, my sense of hearing grasps it. When the object is touch, my sense of touch grasps it, and so on. So all the objects in the world are grasped by our five senses. And it is through that is where desire is located. But not simply the senses, it's the mind. Sometimes you may be fast asleep. All the senses are at that time not functioning, but yet the mind is functioning. I can be just sitting in my room and yet be thinking of so many things in this world. So the mind is another location where desire makes its home. And third is intellect, where I could be thinking about it. So the mind longs for it, longing in the mind. Now, because mind and intellect are mentioned separately, you have to try to make a distinction between what the mind does and the intellect does. Although, as a matter of fact, they are not like two separate entities. So through mind, we long for things. Through intellect, we think about those things. We analyze those things. But through all of these, the senses, the mind, and the intellect, we are attached to the objects. And it is through that desire springs. And that is why it dilutes, staying there. The desire covers our knowledge, covers the reality within us, and dilutes the embodied being. The one who is, the word embodied is actually a beautiful word. Dehi. Deha means the body. Dehi means one who is inside the body. The one who is inside the body, therefore, is called embodied. So we are not the body, but we are the being who is embodied, who has kind of taken the body. And if we forget that we have taken the body, then we think I am the body. So it's a good practice as much as possible. We can find opportunities in our daily life to remind ourselves, I'm living in this body. The body is a great instrument. My mind is a great instrument. I must take good care of it. But I'm inside. And I'm using these instruments to do things. That's the way to think. Verse 41. Tasmat tvam indriyanyadau niyamya bharatarshabha papmanam prajahiyenam jnana vijnana nashanam. Therefore, controlling the senses at the very outset, O best of Bharatas, kill this sinful thing which destroys realization and knowledge. So there are two words, jnana and vijnana. And in commentary, Sridhara distinguishes the two terms by saying jnana is the knowledge that we get from scriptures and from our guru. And vijnana is the knowledge that comes to us through our own spiritual practice. Now, both of these sources of knowledge are covered by desire if we don't kill it. And therefore, Krishna says at the very outset, by the very outset means in the very beginning. Now, what does beginning mean? There's nothing you can do. Already now we are in the middle. So, in other words, it means don't waste any time. It's never too early to start. So we really must start, because the longer we wait, the worse the problem becomes. Sometimes it is said in certain illnesses, quickly we try to find a remedy, the easier it is to cure it. If we wait for a while, then the wound gets festered or the problem gets worse, and then it becomes so much more difficult for cure. That's why there is the saying, a stitch in time saves 9. Although very few people nowadays do any stitching at all. So if it really gets worse, they just throw it and go and buy something else. But in olden days, they say, well, something needs stitching, just do it right away. Otherwise, it'll get worse. And that is why Krishna says at the outset, as soon as possible, as quickly as possible, eliminate desire, which is hiding through the senses, through the mind, through the intellect. Now, how do we do it? What is the way to do it? That Krishna describes in the next verse, verse 42. Indriyani paranyahu indriyebhyah param manaha manasastu para buddhihi yo buddhe paratastu saha. The senses are said to be superior to their objects. Superior to the senses is the mind, but superior to the mind is the intellect, while that which is superior to the intellect is the self. So here we see a hierarchy. We have these several things which are mentioned, the senses, the mind, the intellect, and so on. So superior to the external objects, the senses are superior. Why are the senses superior? Sridhara in his commentary says, Sukshmatvat prakashakatvat cha. Because the senses are more subtle than the external object. The external objects are gross. The senses are subtle. And prakashakatvat cha, because these are the ones which are better reflectors of consciousness than the external objects. Clearly, the senses, you really don't see. You see hardly any consciousness in an external object. Compared to that, the senses are subtler and more conscious. And therefore, they are superior. And superior, now more superior than the senses is the mind, because it is the mind which pushes the senses. Senses don't do things on their own. It's the mind, the longing of the mind, which impels the senses. So that is why the mind is superior to the senses. Now, superior to the mind is the intellect, because it's the intellect which is the decision-making faculty within us, which really says yes or no. And so the mind listens to the orders from the intellect. So intellect gives order to the mind gives it to the senses. It's like this. For instance, there is some object here, and I don't know what it is. And I just kind of think, what is it? Then the intellect, with whatever knowledge it has, says, okay, yeah, it's a good thing, go ahead. Then the mind tells the senses, okay, go ahead. Then I go and pick it up. Now, it happens very quickly. So we never realize this kind of chain of command that's within us. And so, superior to the external objects are the senses, superior to the senses is the mind, superior to the mind is the intellect, and superior to the intellect, much beyond that, because the source of all light of consciousness is the self. And there is nothing higher than the self. And that self is who each one of us is. So we are really the boss of the whole symphony, all the drama that's going on. A boss who is really forgotten that I am the boss. Think about it this way. If some king were to suddenly suffer from amnesia and start wandering about in his kingdom and is asking, what shall I do? What is the rule here? What? And then people are like, he's the king, but you have forgotten you're the king. And if you have forgotten you are the king, you might have all the power, you might have all the wealth, but it's totally useless because you don't know you are the king. And therefore, I have to then, suddenly someone has to go and say, what are you doing? You are the king. And then, and sometimes, in spite of somebody saying the king, say, what rubbish, I'm not the king. And then somebody has to really find some ways of bringing the king to the senses. And once the king comes to the senses, then the king will say, oh my God, I was a king all along. And what was I doing? Like an idiot moving about here and there. That's our story. We are the boss of this whole thing. We are superior than our intellect, than our mind, than our senses, and superior than everything in the world. But we have become like that king. We have forgotten who we are. And so, we are running after things. We say, oh, I want this, I don't want that. But we are the boss. Because we have forgotten it, we are being pushed by our desire, pushed by everything. And all therefore the method is really simple. Method is to recover my lost memory. That's the only problem according to Vedanta. Problem is, nothing has changed. Right now, even at this very moment, we are all infinite beings. Right now, we are one with the divine. We are all divine beings seated here. But divine beings who have forgotten that they are divine. And just see how much troublesome forgetfulness is. That even these books, the Gita, the Upanishad, and for centuries and for generations, they have been telling us, you are the Atman, you are the self, you are not a human being. And we say, yeah, but we're still a human being. So just imagine how strong this forgetfulness has become. Well, since the problem has become chronic, we need some stronger ways of dealing with it. So let's read verse 43. This is how Krishna concludes this chapter. Evam buddhe param buddhva samstabhyatmanamatmana jahi shatrum mahabaho kamarupam durasadam. Thus, knowing that which is beyond the intellect and controlling the self by the self, kill, O mighty armed one, the enemy in the form of desire which is difficult to conquer. See, Krishna here is not speaking about, oh, forgive your enemy. He says, kill. That's the message. He is on a battlefield anyway. See, he's just trying to show. In the first chapter, Arjuna was saying, I don't want to fight. How can I kill these people? And what Krishna is pointing out, the matter is not simply about killing your relatives in front. It's a much serious matter. The real enemy are not those who are standing opposite to you in this battlefield. The real enemy is right inside, the desire and anger. And that has to be killed. And that is a battlefield. We cannot have a peace treaty with these enemies because they don't believe in peace. If I have a peace treaty with them and then turn my back, they will again come and stab me in the back. So just kill them. Controlling the self by the self, the mind by the intellect. You see, what it really means is this. Later on in the Gita, Krishna will also speak about lifting the self by the self. How can you lift the self by the self? I mean, you can, if you're a strong person, you can lift something other than yourself. But the strongest person cannot lift himself or herself. So how can you lift the self by the self? And what is meant here is this, that although the self cannot lift the self because the subject and object have to be different for any action to occur, a kind of division has occurred within us, already within us. Well, several divisions have occurred. Very briefly, first division that has occurred is clearly, we were one, this divine, we were divine, and this division has occurred now. Although we believe in some divine, but we have kind of become separated from it. So there is already one division. Now, after having become separated, and I'm not just one, I suddenly see billions and trillions of objects and things and people around me. Then even within this one being, one part which I have become, again, I have gotten divided into the body and the mind. The mind itself has gotten divided into the conscious mind and the unconscious mind. So, although it's all really one, several divisions have already taken place. And because these divisions are not in harmony, they are creating a lot of stress and tension. The body, the mind. And the mind, there is a higher mind and there is a lower mind. Now, not to go into technicalities about it, we can say that that part of the mind, as spiritual seekers here, that part of the mind which urges us to do our spiritual practice regularly, that part of the mind which feels like studying the Gita, which is able to appreciate the teachings of Krishna in the Gita, and so on. So that's also part of our mind. And there is the other part of our mind which wants to run after the other habits that we have developed in life. And that's why there is this stress, because one part of my mind wants to do a thing, the other part wants to do something else. And so lifting the self by the self, or as he says here, controlling the self by the self, which self is going to control which self? So let's see, think about it this way. So there is a part of my mind says, now I must go and study the Gita at home. And the other part of the mind says, oh, Gita, it's only next week now, so you don't have to worry immediately. Why don't you go and do gardening, which is also nice, or maybe watch some movie. So one part of the mind says, go watch a movie. The other part of the mind says, the Gita. And so now this person said, Gita, and said, in the movie, the Gita. And this goes, and then one of the two is going to win, ultimately. And so the one who wins is the one who is controlling the other. So we just have to look in our own lives that there is this higher part of our mind which wants us to aspire after higher ideals. And there is the other part of our mind which is dragging us towards all this multiplicity of things around. And sometimes we might discover that maybe sometimes one side wins, sometimes the other side wins. And the goal, at least in the beginning, is to allow this higher side to win more often. And ultimately, of course, is to have the control of the lower mind with the higher mind. That is what is Krishna referring to here. Knowing that which is beyond the intellect, that is the self, the Atman, and controlling the self by the self, the lower self by the higher self, kill, that is the only way we can kill desire. So by the very fact when Krishna mentions that this is higher than this is higher than that, this is higher than that, it also means this is different from it. So the senses are different from this, the mind is different from it, the intellect is different from the mind, and the Atman is different from all them all, and I am the Atman. So with that is the final conclusion that Krishna comes to. The more I'm able to dwell in the thought of the Atman, instead of dwelling in my senses, in the mind or the intellect, let me try to maintain the awareness of me being that self, which is birthless and deathless. Because there is no desire there. Other than there, everywhere desire can find a place. That is why they say in Hindi, Jahan Ram, tahan nahi kam. So Ram, where the divine is, where God is, desire cannot stay there. And so by the self, if the Atman appears too abstract an idea to hold on to, we can hold on to our Ishta, or any form of the divine where our mind is naturally attracted. The more we are able to think of the divine, the easier it becomes to keep this enemy of desire away. That's how Krishna concludes. Any questions, thoughts, ideas, what we have seen today? Yeah.
So if we think of our Ishta in the beginning, would that eventually lead to the two merging in our thoughts, Atman with the Ishta?
Yes, actually it's like this. The Atman and Ishta are not two different things.
Yeah,
it's the same. Yeah, it's actually the evening Arati which we do. There is that Khandana Bhava Bandhana. In that, it's composed by Swamiji, and in that Swami Vivekananda, there is one phrase applied to Sri Ramakrishna, which says, Chit Ghana Kai. Chit Ghana Kai means the body. Kaya is body. Chit Ghana. Chit means consciousness. Ghana. So if consciousness were to become solidified and then take a form, then that would be the form. So whoever is our Ishta, if it's Ramakrishna or Krishna or Shiva or whoever, it's not different from consciousness. But that consciousness has become solidified for my benefit. Because I'm not right now strong enough to see the spirit as spirit, worship the formless as formless, for my benefit, that formless reality has taken form. So yes, so when we think of the Ishta, it's that same higher pure consciousness, and that will keep a desire away.
Maharaj, one question. It seems like there may be a paradox here where the self cannot be known until the desire is completely killed, and yet the desire cannot be completely killed until you know the self.
Yep.
Is that right? Or?
Yep, that's right. And so we have to. Yes, that's right. It's like because everything is circular, you see. So the question is then, what do we do? Which here killing desire really means knowing that I'm the self. So the more I'm able to detach myself from the objects, the senses, the mind and the intellect, the stronger I get. So it's not something it's not a question of whether this happens first or that happens first. It's a question of the the range, the degree of clarity we acquire in our efforts. And so that's why we know that we are progressing spiritually, is that when I make an effort, and of course, no one succeeds fully in the first attempt. Then we may fail a lot of times. But if we say in our 10 or 100 attempts we succeed once, then there is hope. Well, at least I was successful once. Then I keep on trying. Then maybe then I find that instead of being successful only 1% of the time, I'm being successful now 5%. Then I keep on working harder and harder. Then it becomes 10% and 20%. That's how progress occurs. So it's not. It might sound as a paradox the way you put it, but this is how it really occurs. So it's a gradual process that occurs slowly. Yeah.
Isn't it that desire will lead us to where we want to go? Because this is also a kind of desire that I want a spiritual goal.
Sure.
So this is a kind of, we say, positive desire, but desire is a desire. And when we try to reach that goal, then all desire dissolves.
Right. Correct. You're right. So that's exactly what Sri Ramakrishna said, that to change the mode of the desire. So since desire is something so inbuilt in us, rather than desiring something which takes me away from God, let me desire God. Yeah, that's how it is.
Corollary to that question would be this notion of desire bringing about motivation. And then, if let's say you have a motivation to learn, which can be equated with a desire to learn, in the absence of that, you can have complacency and not necessarily want to grow to another level, let's say, in terms of your knowledge base. So in some ways, that's also a desire, but in that case, you can equate it to a desire for something higher than yourself.
Yeah, it's like this. You see, no desire can be artificially generated. I mean, why do we have desire at all in life for anything? We desire those things which we believe will make me happy, which will make me happy. I mean, everybody wants to be happy. And so if I feel, well, this will make me happy, then I desire that thing. So how then shall I replace my desire for the world by my desire for God? And that's where then I have to then try to figure out in my mind why desiring God will make me more happy than desiring other things. If I'm able to convince myself correctly that desiring God will make me more happy than others, then the desire for God will grow. But if I'm not able to convince myself, then theoretically I may believe, I may read in the Gita, or desire for God, I may read in Ramakrishna's conversations, desire God, but deep down I'm not really convinced that desiring God will bring me greater joy than desiring something else. So it's more a self-motivation will come through a conviction in what is it that is a real source of joy. That is how it looks.
So with respect to personal relationships, so if you desire to, let's say, be close to your family or your children, how would you sort of look at that type of desire?
Well, again, any kind of desire other than to the infinite being can be a source of some joy and it can be a source of pain also, both. Yeah, everything that is connected with anything in this world cannot be separated from the polarity of both. It might seem it's fun, but it's also painful. You cannot just have one without the other.
In the order senses, the mind is superior than the senses. But senses is also where the desire originates.
No, desire doesn't say only in the senses. Desire is located in all the three places: the senses, the mind, and the intellect.
So which one do you work on first? Or do you have
Work on all three. Well, having said that, it's easier to work on that which is gross than that on which is subtle. for instance, let's say I have been told I have a great desire for candy, and I've been told you shouldn't take candy. Now, how I should begin working on? First, I must work on my senses. If there is candy in front, don't take it. That may be difficult, but that is easier than telling my mind, don't think about it, or don't long for it. So yeah, we must work on all three, but oftentimes the senses are easier than the mind, and the mind is easier than the intellect. Because the more subtler it gets, the more difficult it gets also. So if you really want to take them up one by one, begin with the senses first. Yeah. Okay, so we will continue. So with this we come to the end of chapter 3. And next we will take up chapter 4. But before that, first let me conclude with a prayer. Om Jananim Saradam Devim Ramakrishnam Jagadgurum Padapadme Tayo Shritva Pranamami Muhur Muhuhu. We bow down to Sri Ramakrishna and Holy Mother again and again. So next Wednesday, we will not have the study group. So we begin chapter 4 2 weeks from now. So next Wednesday is holiday. Holiday for successfully completing chapter 3. And yes, and so this Sunday we will have Antar Yoga as usual with spiritual readings and meditation and music. So you're welcome for that. On Saturday and Tuesday, our Aarti and meditation will also continue as usual. So we'll conclude with a prayer now. May the Divine Being, who is the Father in heaven of the Christians, Holy One of the Jewish faith, Allah of the Muslims, Buddha of the Buddhists, Tao of the Taoists, Ahura Mazda of the Zoroastrians, the Great Spirit of the Native Americans, and Brahman of the Hindus, lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May the all-loving Being become manifest unto us. May we be granted strength, freedom, and clear understanding. May the Divine bless us all and fill our hearts with infinite grace and love. Peace, peace, peace be unto all.